If you ever visit the Foxconn factory complex in Shenzhen, China, you cannot miss the nets. And it is hard to get them out of your mind when you leave. They are there to keep the people who build products for Apple or Dell or Nintendo from taking a deadly leap off a factory roof. And a Foxconn executive admits that without those nets and the suicide cluster that produced them, we wouldn't be looking inside the iFactory tonight. The suicide nets went up in the spring of 2010 when 9 Foxconn workers jumped to their desks in the span of 3 months. A total of 18 employees took their own lives or tried to in recent years, and given the company's massive size, Foxconn's suicide rate is actually well below China's national average. One reason, Louis Wu, our executive host, said it took several months and several suicides before Foxconn and Apple were shaken into action.
At the beginning is that we see a few suicides, but we didn't really see that there is a cluster effect. Right? Until I think either the 5th or the 6th one.
He says Apple's #2 man at the time, Tim Cook, flew to Shenzhen and helped assemble a team of psychological experts who recommended nets to make impulsive souls think twice before jumping. Foxconn also then promised to raise wages, and they opened this counseling center.
And why do you think so many happened at the same time?
There are many reasons, Counselor Yang Chunhui tells me. Of course, some has to do with management. But they had more to do with the new generation of migrant workers from the rural areas, their state of mind, and how they cope with society. Also, it's hard to make friends here, she says. But it wasn't just the suicides that caught the world's attention.
An explosion hit a Foxconn plant in Chengdu.
Last year, poorly ventilated aluminum dust led to 2 separate explosions in iPad polishing stations, killing 4, injuring 77. There is, in fact, one labor rights group in the country who claims that they tried to warn you about combustible dust before the explosions. Is that true? Do you have regrets about not doing more sooner?
But you ask me, whether, we feel we could have done a lot more or better to avert that explosion. Absolutely. We were devastated.
Apple takes working conditions very, very seriously, and we have for a very long time.
Apple declined my repeated request to interview new CEO Tim Cook, but referred us to his statements at a Goldman Sachs investor conference last week.
We don't let anyone cut corners on safety.
But now more than ever, they are trying to prove that to the world. Until this year, Apple had never released the names of its suppliers. They almost doubled the number of supplier audits performed last year, and a few months ago they decided to join the Fair Labor Association. And we were there when the head of the FLA arrived to begin the largest ever audit of Foxconn.
This is not a surprise inspection.
No.
So how do you know they're not putting on a show for you if they know you're coming?
I expect them to put on a show for us. That's normal. But our method is such that we have a bottom-up interview method that just surfaces. Over the next couple of days, everything will surface.
It's only fair to note that Apple is just one of many Foxconn customers, and most of them have escaped this recent storm of bad publicity. As one of the FLA auditors explains, the biggest and most visible brands often take the heat for the entire industry.
And why the timing like this?
Well, we call it the Nike moment, right, in the industry. So there was a moment for Nike in the 90s when they got a lot of publicity, negative publicity. And they weren't the worst. It's probably similar like Apple. They're not necessarily worse than anybody else. It's just that the publicity started to build up.
Part of the Fair Labor Association team scours time cards and pay records, while another uses, yes, iPads to beam the anonymous grievances of 35,000 workers to a server in New Zealand.